Just by a quick show of hands, how many of you see your kids in that video? Yeah, now another show of hands, how many of you see your husbands in that video? Any elbows going on right here? Yeah, I see a couple going out. Hey, well, anyways, I'm glad to be here. My name is Jeremy, and if I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, and I'm the service programming director here at North Point. And like Jordan said last week, Buck, our lead pastor, is still alive. He's still well. He's actually going to be back to wrap up the series for part 4 next week. But today we're in part 3, and since the beginning of this series in part 1, we've been saying that a life hack is essentially a truth which, if applied, makes your life better and makes you better at life. So it's a principle that if we put it into practice, it improves the quality of our life. And as I was thinking about this topic this week, I was talking to my wife, Ashley, about it, and I asked her a very dangerous question. I said, babe, where do you see me struggle with this in my life? And the thing to know about Ashley is that she's one of the most encouraging people on the planet. In fact, she is on staff at North Point as well, and when somebody comes on staff at North Point, you have to take this test. It's kind of a personality profile test. And what we discovered, it's similar to like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, but what we discovered is that her personality profile is actually an encourager. And so being married to an encourager is awesome. Like she builds me up and encourages me all the time. But one of the things that I've realized is that every now and then my head starts to get a little bit too big, and so she'll say something to kind of bring me back to planet Earth, and this was one of those moments. And so I said, babe, where do you see me struggle with this in my life? And she told me, well, you have a little bit of a tendency to get a little bit obsessive when it comes to materialistic things. In other words, like I get these blinders on that happens when I know what I want and I want to get something and I don't really want to listen to anybody who tells me otherwise. And what I call this, I've termed it this way, is it's a Craigslist obsessive kind of personality. And some of y'all laugh because maybe you can relate with this, but what happens for me is when we are about to make a big purchase of some sort, whether it's furniture or a car or a new piece of technology, because I love techie stuff, I will first go on Craigslist and I will search for what we're looking for, and I will go and call and email and message and lowball pretty much everybody on Craigslist to try and find the deal and try to find what I'm looking for. And I do this with everything, and these blinders begin to come on, and I begin to create these scenarios in my head, and we'll be sitting on the couch together watching a movie one day, and I'll just turn to her and be like, babe, I got it figured out. If you give half of your clothes to Plato's Closet, and I donate bone marrow, we can get the new iPhones. And I create these kind of scenarios in my brain about how we can kind of get the next thing. And what's funny is my parents have actually told me that I've done this my entire life, that they've watched me go through this cycle over and over and over again growing up. And there was one particular instance where about 1.5 years ago where they told me not to do something, and I did it anyways because I kind of had my blinders on. And we were in Colorado visiting some family, and Ashley and I try to go there every now and then. That's where I'm originally from. There's her and I up on a mountain. The town right behind us is the town of Golden. It's right outside of Denver. And Golden is where I'm originally from, and so we go here and we go walking around, and it's one of our favorite places to go. And when we were walking around one day, literally on every street corner or every new street we turned, it felt like we saw a golden retriever literally everywhere. Like I just saw golden retriever after golden retriever after golden retriever. And for me, growing up, I had a lot of dogs. We had 3 to 4 dogs at any time. And my favorite dog that we ever had was a golden retriever named Buddy. He was the most smartest, intelligent dog in the world. And so I started seeing these golden retrievers, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I could have a golden retriever. And so, of course, what do? But I pull open my phone, go to Craigslist, and I search 3 very dangerous words: golden retriever puppies. And just a quick side note here, don't ever, unless you are fully committed to buying a puppy, don't ever search for one on Craigslist, because it's like my blinders came on like instantly. Like I saw these puppies and I was like, oh, I have to have one. And so I started calling and messaging literally everybody in the Denver area that I could find, because I was ready to go pick it up and drive it home with us. And I couldn't find one. We go to Breckenridge a couple days later. We're in Breckenridge. Finally, I find one that's in the San Antonio area. And so I message them, we make out a deal, and then we drive home. And then the next morning we wake up, we go to San Antonio, we pick up this puppy. My parents said, hey, you probably shouldn't do this, but I had my blinders on. So we pick up this puppy, and lo and behold, I have ended up with the dumbest golden retriever on the planet. Like, I kid you not, this dog is stupid. I can say that objectively, too, because he literally has the personality of, like, Patrick the Starfish from SpongeBob, if y'all are familiar with that. And the reason I can say this is because we put him in a puppy class, and about halfway through, he got held back. Like, they was halfway through, and he wasn't making any progress at all, and they came to us and were like, listen, we need you guys to start over, because this dog is stupid. And so that's the dog I ended up with. I'm going to show you a little picture of him. This is Breck, our golden retriever. That's his face. That so captures his personality right there. Bear is our little Ewok dog that we have. That's Breck. But the reason I share that is because Ashley told me that I have a tendency to get a little bit kind of blinded at times when I know what I want. I can't really see myself or my decision-making clearly. I struggle to remain objective at times. And for me, I ended up with a dumb golden retriever as a result of it. But I don't know if maybe you can relate. Perhaps there's something in your life. Maybe it's Craigslist. Maybe it's Amazon. Maybe it's eBay. Maybe there's some area of your life, whether it's financial or maybe not financial, where you struggle to see yourself and your decision-making clearly at times, or you struggle to remain objective at times. I think we'd all agree that we have those parts of our life and those parts of us. But what I think is bittersweet about the culture we live in is that we have a lot of autonomy. We have a lot of decision-making ability in our lives. But in our case, autonomy tends to mean this. Autonomy is the ability to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with enough money to do it, and enough money to get me out of trouble in case I get caught, right? Like, we make decisions all the time. We can choose what we want to spend our money on. We can choose where we want to go to college, what kind of job we want to have. We can choose who we want to date, who we want to marry. You know, what if we want to have kids, if we don't want to have kids. We can choose all of these different things in our life, and for the most part, we have control over these things. But oftentimes, if you're anything like me, what I have discovered is that my decision-making ability tends to get me into a little bit of trouble every now and then. Andy Stanley, one of my favorite pastors, says it like this. He says that we don't get in trouble because we won't take advice. We get in trouble because we take our own advice. Isn't that true? We get in trouble because we take our own advice, and he takes it a little bit of a layer deeper when he says this. He says, and our own advice is filtered through the emotions that distort our reality. Our own advice is filtered through the emotions that distort our reality. In other words, when it comes to making decisions that emotionally benefit us, we are professionals at giving ourselves advice. This is why people end up with puppies in the first place. This is why people have YOLO tattoos. This is why, when it comes to the world of dieting, like, we have invented the term cheat day. Like, cheat day is every day. Like, we've invented that for ourselves to justify our behavior. This is so easy to see in the lives of other people, but so difficult to see in ourselves. But I think that if we're honest, we all have this internal nudge or whisper that at times pushes us in the right direction, but we just don't want to do it. And that's a problem. Why? Well, because our inability to see ourselves and our decisions clearly could lead us down a path that we never intended to travel. If we don't learn to look at ourselves objectively in our decision-making, it leads us down a path that leads us somewhere in life that we never really intended to go. Relationally, financially, vocationally, maybe even spiritually. And so when I think about the question of what hangs in the balance of this, topic, this might sound a little bit dramatic, but for me, I think just about everything does. And so today, I don't want to just unpack why we do this. We're going to do that. What is in us that causes us to do this? But I also want to talk about what we can do about it. Because I believe that there is a life hack, there is an action that you and I can apply today in our life that if we choose to do it, helps us see our decisions and ourselves more clearly, helps us make more objective decisions, live a life we want to live, and ultimately live a life that I think God has for each and every person in this room. This example, the best example or explanation I know as to why we do this comes from the person of Jesus. As so often happens, Jesus is in an argument with these people called the Pharisees. 2,000 years ago, at a part in his ministry, is an argument with this group of people called the Pharisees. And these are the religious people. They are the rule followers. They're all about the law. They don't like Jesus because he's getting all of the attention. And so they're constantly looking for a way to undermine him and to get the attention off of him. In this case was no different. And here's where we see from Jesus why we have this inside of us. Here's what happens. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders?" Hey, Rabbi, Jesus, your disciples are accountable to you. We're asking you, why do they break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat, which to us sounds a little bit petty, but to them there was an ancient Jewish custom that was about washing your hands and having clean hands before you eat. Now, the Pharisees had kind of tweaked it and made it their own, and so they were trying to hold people accountable to it in the way that they saw the law, and Jesus knew this. And it was all about a ritual. It was all about a ceremony, and so Jesus knew this, so he talks back and forth with them a little bit, and then a couple verses later, he quotes an Old Testament passage in the book of Isaiah that actually talks about the Pharisees, and he quotes this to their face, and here's what he says. He says, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." In other words, these people do a great job on the outside, looking like they got it all together and them and God are so good. But their hearts, what's going on in here, are far from me. And then he turns to the crowd and he says this. He says, "Listen and understand." In other words, everybody, listen up. I want to tell you guys the point of this. The Pharisees don't know this. I'm going to tell you guys what's going on here. And then he says this statement. "What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." To which I think everybody in the crowd kind of goes, "Oh, that's deep, Jesus. What do you think he meant by that? What does that mean?" And then Jesus just kind of turns and he walks the other direction. And I would imagine if we're watching this scene play out, the disciples are going back and forth, "Oh my gosh, look at what he just said." And then they follow Jesus and they kind of turn around when Jesus isn't looking and they're like, nah, towards the Pharisees, And then they turn right around to Jesus when they get out of earshot and they say this. Look at what Peter says. "Can you explain that to us? Explain the parable to us. I know we acted like we understood that, but can you unpack that a little bit?" And Jesus is like, "Peter, are you still so dull? Seriously, dude. You've been with me for months now. You need to pick up on this stuff eventually." And he says, "Okay, I'll unpack it for you one more time. Here's the point I was trying to make." And here's where we get a glimpse into Jesus' sense of humor with these guys, because he says this. "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body?" This whole anatomy thing, are you guys familiar with this? To which the disciples are like, "Yeah, a couple times a day. Yeah, okay, we get where you're going." And Jesus is like, "Great. We got that out of the way. Now here's my point, and here's what I was trying to make a point to the Pharisees." He says, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them." In other words, it's not so much about what's going on over there or what you show on the outside, it's what's going on in your heart. That internal thing that each of us have. That emotional wrestling that happens, it's where our identity or our security is. Our heart is where we have that internal struggle to say yes or no in a particular instance or situation or decision in our life. And Jesus says that is what matters. That's what matters, because what's in here is going to come out of here. It's going to come out in your words. And I want to pause because we all agree with this, but we might not know it. And here's how I think that we agree with this, is because we've all said this or thought this. Sometimes I say things I don't mean. We've all said or thought that, sometimes we slip up, "Oh, I didn't mean to say that." When what we really mean to say is this. Sometimes I say things I don't mean to say out loud, right? Out loud. We didn't mean to slip up in that way. We didn't mean for that to come out, but that's Jesus' point, is because oftentimes what is coming out of here is an indicator of what is going on in here. And he says, if you're not careful, your heart can wreak havoc in your life. It can do damage to you and those around you. Why? Well, because for out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. It's a big deal. The heart is beautiful. It's where you experience love and joy and intimacy. But if you're not careful, it can do a lot of damage in your life. Mark, another one of Jesus' disciples, listening to him describe this, adds to this list, and he says it includes greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy or jealousy, arrogance, pride, and folly, foolishness. The heart is a dangerous thing if we're not careful. And he says, and these are what defile a person. We all have a tendency to struggle seeing ourselves and our decision-making clearly at times, and it can lead us down a path that we ultimately don't want to go. And Jesus says that thing inside of us, what that is it is our heart. It's our heart. It's where we go to justify our behaviors that we make sometimes in our life. And we see this in culture all the time. For me, I don't watch The Bachelorette on a regular basis with my wife, but if I did happen to tune in at 7:30 on Mondays to ABC on a regular basis with a bowl of popcorn next to me, what I would hypothetically notice is that when the Bachelorette breaks up with one of her 17 boyfriends every week, she says and justifies it with this statement: I just need to follow my heart. I just need to follow my heart. Which I think if Jesus heard that, he would say that's probably one of the most ridiculous pieces of advice that we could give ourselves or those around us. But we say and hear things in culture like this all the time. And I'm not speaking for Jesus, but I think that we say these things as a cop-out to justify whatever we emotionally want in any given moment. And so with that, I think we can just pray, and we can go home, we can all figure it out, and we'll have a great rest of our day. No, this is a big deal. Our hearts can do damage in our life. What do we do with that? How do we navigate our hearts if what's in them is going to come out on us and the other people? And that's where our life hack comes in for today. Since the beginning of this series, we've been unpacking these life hacks. We call them principles or truths, and they come from the book of Proverbs, which is written by a guy named Solomon. He's one of the most wealthy and successful people to have ever lived, according to Google. And Solomon, towards the end of his life, he wrote in the book of Proverbs all of these principles that he gleaned. He wrote them down to try and help people understand how he got to be where he was at the end of his life. And we've been pulling these life hacks, these truths from the book of Proverbs, and Solomon is actually very familiar with this concept of the heart. And he describes it like this. He says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Hey, this is so crucial. This is so important. Above all else, Solomon says, guard your heart, keep it in check, keep tabs on your heart. Why? Because everything you think, say, or do flows from it, is a result of what is going on in here. Solomon and Jesus are pretty aligned on what they think about the heart. But I think then we go, okay, Solomon, what does it look like to guard our heart? What does that practically mean in our life? And later on in the book of Proverbs, he gives us a life hack. He unpacks this for us in one simple but profound sentence. Here's what Solomon says: the purposes of a person's heart are like deep water. The purposes of a person's heart are like deep water. When you look inward and you try to see what's going on in your heart, and you try to unpack that a little bit, the motives, the purposes, oftentimes what it looks like is almost like a deep body of water. It's like you look down in there and you can't really see how deep it goes. You don't know what's swimming around in there. It's a little scary. It's a little hard to understand at times. And he says that's what our hearts are like when we look into our heart and try to guard our heart. It's difficult. But, Solomon says, one who has understanding, a wise person, one with insight, brings them out. One who has understanding looks into their heart, the depths of their heart, and they bring out the things, regardless of how they feel about it emotionally. They look at their hearts objectively and draw those things out. I love the action-oriented verb that Solomon uses. He says brings. Brings as in like pulls and draws continually. It's practical. It's something that you actually apply and do in your life. Somebody who wants to know what's going on inside of them brings out their heart. And so Solomon and what Jesus says, and our bottom line and our life hack for today is this, is you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. No, not really. That's not our life hack, but that's the sentiment behind it. Solomon says that if you want to draw things out of your heart, if you want to make objective decisions in life, to live a life that God has for you, then you have to discover your heart. You have to choose to discover your heart, to look objectively at what is going on in here, to choose to ask the really difficult questions, to choose to ask, why do I really do this? Why do I really do this? Why am I really making this financial decision when I know it could lead me somewhere I don't want to go? What is really going on inside of me that makes me want to engage in a relationship with this person when I know it's going to hurt me in the long run? Why do I keep exploding in anger on those that I love most over and over again? What is going on inside of me that causes me to do that? Because anger is often the result of a deeper emotion. Or why do I keep running to this habit to fill a hole inside of me when it continues to hurt me and those around me over and over and over again? Or perhaps your difficult question is, why do I keep running away from God, really, instead of running towards Him? It's choosing to ask the difficult questions. It's choosing to discover your heart. And not just discover it, but discover it on purpose. We know that what's in us is going to come out of us. And so we're going to discover our hearts accidentally one day. Why not choose to be proactive and discover our hearts today on purpose? And not only that, but Solomon said brings, as in plural, as in continual. Why not discover your heart on purpose on a regular basis? In other words, it's practical. Our lives are always changing. There's always new situations, new complexities. We move, we get new jobs, we have kids, all these things, always changing. This isn't a one and done thing. We continually have to learn to discover our heart, to stay objective, and make decisions based on what we find. One of my favorite examples or illustrations of what this looks like comes from a guy named Brennan Manning. He's one of my favorite authors, and he describes it like this. Take this bowl of water right here. When I look into the bowl of water, I can see my reflection. But when I begin to ripple my hand across the surface of the water, I can no longer see my reflection. And our lives tend to look like this. Our lives tend to look a little bit ripply. They're crazy. There's a lot going on. There's so much strife, so much ambition, so much busyness, so much noise, that if we ever try to look inward, we can't see what's going on. Only when I pull my hand away, the waters settle, and I look again, can I begin to see what's going on. Only when I'm still and I create space intentionally. Our lives and our heart are the same way. If we don't intentionally pull away on a regular basis, on purpose, things to discover our heart, we'll miss out on seeing what's actually going on inside of us. Discover your heart on purpose, on a regular basis. To wrap up our time, what I said earlier is I want to give you something that you can do today to discover your heart. And so to wrap up our time, I want to give you 3 things that you can do today that you can walk out and apply in your life to begin doing this. The first is this. You can ask someone. You can ask someone. Take somebody out to coffee, someone you trust, somebody you know, and just say, hey, I think there's this thing inside of me, but I haven't quite figured it out. Can you help me with this? Can you give me some advice? If you have a spouse or a close friend or a mentor, a great question to ask somebody is what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? You live on the other side of me. What's that like? People can see things that we can't. It's not our weaknesses that are going to get us. It's our blind spots that are going to get us. What's that like? Chances are the answer that you get is going to surprise you a little bit. And it might even be a bit humbling. But I think that the answer you get, the value that you get from it, and the value you ascribe to the other person when you ask this question is so worth whatever awkwardness or uncomfortability you might get from asking this question in the first place. What's it like to be on the other side of me? Now, if you don't have anybody in your life that you can ask a question like that to, or if you just want another step to discover your heart, one of the best ways I think you can do that is by joining a group. We talked about this earlier on in the service, but small group environments are places where you get to connect with people, grow in your relationship with God, and ultimately unearth things in your heart that are going on. It's beautiful because it's where you get encouraged when times are good, and you get called out on it when your heart's leading you somewhere that you don't ultimately want to go. Get in a group to ask somebody questions like that. And lastly, and the most personal one for me, is I think you can discover your heart today by beginning to practice a habit of journaling. What's crazy is some people do this, some people don't, but when you look at some of the most successful people in history, Albert Einstein, Benjamin Franklin, Steve Jobs, you look at Lewis and Clark, you look at Thomas Edison, people all throughout history, go back thousands of years. You go to Socrates, who said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Or you go to Aristotle, who said, knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. People have practiced the habit of journaling for a millennia and have gleaned insight that have allowed them to make a mark in history. And I think we would do well to take a lesson from their book as well. But for me, when I first heard or somebody told me that I should start journaling, I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world, to be totally honest. And the reason is because I'm more of a left brain, logical, analytical person. And I found that when I opened up my iPad or I opened up a piece of paper and I tried to journal, I would just kind of sit there and look at it. And I was like, I have no clue what to write because I had no clue what was going on inside of me. And then one of the most helpful things that I ever learned was actually a template to journal. And it was about, hey, talk about what you did yesterday, what's going on right now, and what do you have planned for today. And this template comes from a leader and author, Michael Hyatt. And what's cool is that if you've never tried journaling before, or you're logical, analytical like me, this is a great way to try it. And you can actually find it in the message notes of the North Point app with this message, or we're going to post it on social media this week so you can try it out there. But if you've never tried out journaling and you're thinking about it right now, one of the things that I would say to you, and I'd just give you a heads up on, is that it is a little bit scary at times. And I think journaling is kind of like looking into one of these mirrors. Have you guys ever looked into one of these mirrors before? My mom had one in her bathroom as a kid, and I'd go in there and I'd walk by it and be like, I can't see anything. And then I'd get close, and I was like, oh my God, I have 700 blackheads on my face that I didn't know about. And that's what journaling is like. It's looking close at yourself and your heart, and you begin to see things that aren't totally pretty in there. And what I began to discover is that there were things that were uncomfortable. There were things that were scary. There were things that were painful at times. But the beautiful thing about a relationship with God is that he meets us in those things. Is that he says, hey, I know that's uncomfortable. I know that's scary. I know that really hurts what they did to you. But I'm with you. And God walks alongside us in the process of discovering our heart in this way. And for me, when I looked into my heart, what I found was a lot of nasty stuff. I found a lot of anger. I found a lot of jealousy, shame, insecurity, a need for perfectionism that I just had to control everything. And one of my mentors, I was telling him about this, and one of my mentors told me this one day, and I'll never forget it. He said, the greatest gap in life is the 18 inches between your head and your heart. In other words, the greatest gap in life seems to be when we discover something in our heart, but we just can't quite get our brain to catch up with it, right? I looked into my heart and I saw these things, but I just said, God, I don't know what, I'm discovering the things you want me to discover, but I don't know what you want me to do with them because I can't just really turn the ship and go in a different direction. And then one day I found myself sitting on a beach and I was looking out at the water, and this proverb, this life hack came to mind. You know, the purposes of a person's heart, like deep water, one with insight brings them out. Okay. And I was unhappy. I'd spent the previous couple days like being a grouchy person on the beach, which is like, why would we ever do that? You're at the beach. And I was unhappy and I was tense and I was irritated. And I looked at that water and I just remembered that proverb and I just said, God, all right, fine. You want me to do this? Fine. I pulled my journal out of my bag and I just began to write down everything that was going on in my heart. All the things I was mad at, all the reasons it was God's fault and not my fault. And I was just talking about all of these things with him. And then after about 15 minutes, I put my pen down and I looked at the water again. And I just said, all right, God, you want me to discover my heart? There it is. What do you want me to do about it? I don't know what else you want from me. And then this thought came in to my brain, this sentence, and it's something that I've written down every single morning ever since it first came to me, and it was this, is God, help me feel in my heart what I have chosen in my mind. God, help me feel in my heart what I've chosen in my mind. God, I see in my heart, I'm really angry and hurt at that person. I don't want to fight for a relationship with them. But God, I'm going to choose that in my mind, and would you just help my feelings catch up to it? God, I feel really jealous. I look around and I see what everybody else has all the time. And God, I just feel that, but I'm going to choose to be grateful. And would you just help my emotions and my heart catch up to that? God, would you just fill in the gap? Would you help me feel in my heart what I've chosen in my mind? And what I discovered when I did this is that all of my problems went away. No, not really. Not at all. That couldn't be further from the truth. What I discovered in this is that I still felt all of those things, but my point with that whole thing is that God meets us in those moments. He walks alongside us in the midst of whatever we're going through if we choose to invite him in and if we choose to discover our hearts. It's one of the ways we grow in our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And it is painful and uncomfortable, but it is so worth it. Why? Well, because we all have the tendency to allow our hearts to run rampant in our life. And there is too much at stake for you and I to do this. Too much hangs in the balance. Kids, families, marriages, our finances, work, future, job, our relationship with our Heavenly Father. If we don't choose to look inside and see what's going on in here, we're never going to know what God could have had for us if we had chosen to trust him and invite him in to those things. And so my challenge for you, my hope and my prayer for you is that you can walk out of here and begin to discover your heart. It might hurt, but I promise you'll be glad that you did. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you that we even have a brain that can comprehend what's going on in our hearts. God, that's so cool. Lord, would you just help us begin to look inside of there, look at our past, look at our memories, and see what things have gotten lodged in there, and we've allowed them to dictate our life, but you can come alongside us and help us not allow those things to dictate our life any longer. God, would you help us reach into our heart and pull those things out? Would you walk alongside us in the process, in the midst of that? God, we thank you that you do meet us there. Thank you for your son, Jesus, who's with us and guides us through it. God, would you just help us see things the way that you see things? God, we pray all this in your son's name. Amen. Thanks so much for being here, y'all. Be here back next week for part 4 with Buck of Life Hacks. Have a great Sunday.